As a parent, have you ever had a moment when you went, eek? Probably so if you're a parent. I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me on this episode. There's lots of things about raising kids that are hard. One of those hard things is the world that we live in and the reality of pornography. My guest on the program today had one of those eek moments when she discovered her son was watching pornography. What was the experience like for her internally? How did she walk through that with her kids? And what to do when your child is wrestling with this. Barb Winters is a wife, a mom, a pastor's wife, has 4 now adult children, and I will let her tell her story. But one of the main things she does today is help other parents and families deal with some of these hard things. She is a writer, a speaker. She's also a risk avoidance specialist and a lead facilitator at E3 Family Solutions, equipping people in school and in church to address some of these hard things. You will find the links to Barb's resources under this video, and I would encourage you to check that out. But without waiting any longer, what to do when your kid is watching porn. Barb Winters, it's a real joy to have you on our program today. Thank you for taking the time and sharing of your heart and your story. Really glad to have you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me here today.
We connected through a summit that was talking about hard things, and we're going to talk about some of those hard things here today. And you have been helping parents, families, kids deal with some of these hard things for quite some time. And let me just start with how did you come to this, your story of getting here?
Absolutely. I'd love to tell my story. So I am a pastor's wife, and my husband and I moved to Florida a little over 7 years ago now. And we were just on a short walk shortly after we moved here, kind of taking in all our new scenery, enjoying the lovely sunshine. And as we rounded the corner to come to our home, we could see across the busy street our son standing in our front yard. And he was jumping up and down in hysterics. He was crying. He was motioning to us to come to him quickly. And as we stood there waiting for that traffic to kind of pause, neither one of us could figure out what was going on. You know, was his sister lying in a pool of blood? Was the house on fire? What in the world could be causing the ruckus? So we finally got across that street, and I just could barely catch some words coming out of his mouth through all the crying and stuff. I heard pornography, and I heard police coming, and I heard arrested. And, you know, it just took me a moment to try and comprehend, put it all together. Like, what is he talking about? And we finally figured out that he had been watching pornography, and a thankfully bogus warning popped up on his screen stating that if he did not pay money to the person at the other end of the screen, they were going to call the police and have him arrested. Well, this was the first we'd heard anything like this going on in our house. You know, it's so interesting how life imprints these like memories on you. I remember standing in our yard, and the grass is green and the sky is blue and there's flowers blooming all around me, and yet I'm hearing these words that would completely change the trajectory of my life, specifically my mom life. So that was the beginning of our story. Our son was 14 at the time, and we put some protections in place that we thought would help him at that time. And it worked for, I think, a little bit. But after almost 2 years, he came back to us at the age of 16 and said he was still highly involved in pornography. And it was at that time that we really found out how deeply ingrained it was in his life, and assumed at that point that he was actually addicted. So that's kind of what started my desire to try and figure out what is going on in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you heard those words from your son, or again 2 years later, he comes back and says, I'm still really into this. What were some of the thoughts in your mom's head? What were you feeling? What questions? What was going on in your mind?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, initially standing out in that yard, I had like this gag reflex. I really thought I was gonna actually throw up. It was so shocking. So I think the initial feeling was shock.
Yeah.
And then it kind of morphed. That was a really long conversation. And through that conversation, then, even through the years, I felt anger and sadness and betrayal, guilt, all the mom guilt. I have
Mm,
literally broken my son, is what I thought.
wow.
Shame, which comes from all that too. And also loneliness, which is why I started talking out. That's why I started Hopeful Mom, because I felt so alone in all of our endeavors. There just wasn't anybody I could talk to. I talked to one person who lived out of town, but other than that, it wasn't like, you can't go to your best friend and
Right.
say, hey, my son's watching porn. How about yours? Woohoo, let's work this out together. No,
Wow.
that
Yeah.
doesn't happen. So lots of feelings, lots of feelings.
You talked about mom guilt.
Yes.
I'm sure that there may be other moms listening and watching, and that's probably something that resonates. What did you think you had done or not done? How did you take it on yourself?
Sure. Well, I felt like I hadn't protected him well
Okay.
and that I hadn't trained him well. I mean, we were a Christian family. I was a homeschool mom. I had taught all the principles that I thought were the things that you were to do, right?
Yeah.
Here's when and how you have sex. Here's sinful behaviors. Here's proper behaviors, all that stuff. And so I had assumed that somewhere in all of my teachings that I had done something incorrect or wrong. And that like I said, that I had broken him and it was all my fault, that he was going to turn into this horrendous person.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Um, how did your relationship with your son change walking through those experiences? It must have changed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very interesting question. So at first it was very rocky. And I talk about, in some of my writings and chats and stuff, I talk about how I initially thought people who watch pornography were monsters.
Yeah.
So I had this like disconnect in my head. Like, how do I view my son now that he's the one who watches pornography? I could not mesh these two thoughts together, that my normal, natural, funny, smart, personable, wonderful son, who I got along with really, really well and never lied to us, also is this kid who watches pornography on a regular basis. So it was really difficult at first, for me to trust him, for
Yeah.
me to even really look at him, because I kept having these thoughts in my head. But I also knew as a mom that I couldn't walk away from him. I couldn't leave him on his own. He needed our help, and we recognized that. So just this struggle, this internal struggle of how do I interact with him? And a lot of falling on my knees. I mean, there were so many days where we're schooling and things are kind of clicking, just normal, natural stuff that you do on a regular basis. And then all of a sudden, I just have this meltdown,
Yeah.
and I'd just have to leave and go to my room and get on my knees and just pray that God would, give me the strength and the dignity and the mothering stature, because that's what you need, right? To
Yes.
continue in the process of loving him well.
Yeah.
So, but it also strengthened us. I mean, ultimately, I think that he and I have one of the best relationships that I've ever had. I mean, right now we are like very tight, and I can tell him anything, he can tell me anything. So ultimately, it really strengthened our relationship.
Oh, it's good to hear that. I'm sure
Yeah.
parents who may be listening and watching will be glad to hear that it doesn't have to be, falling off the cliff.
Yeah.
We'll come back to some of those things along the way, but
Okay.
what do you attribute the fact that now your relationship is strong and can deeply connected with your son? What helped that happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, he knew when he came back to us that second time, he absolutely knew that this was something that he needed to get rid of in his life. And so when he came back to us the second time, and nothing can prepare you for this, even
Yeah.
though he told us once, you're still taken aback a little bit when you hear it again. But I at that point told him, look, we need to make sure that we're keeping things in the light. Okay. So we had built some trust in the 2 years previous to that, because we had told him that we were on his side, we were going to take care of this, we were going to be there with him, that we loved him unconditionally, all things that are so important for our kids to hear.
Yeah.
So I think when he came back, he knew that that we were going to be there for him. But I told him we can't keep things that are in the dark in the dark. We've got to expose them to the light, because he was afraid that he was going to hurt me and that he was going to hurt his dad by exposing all this stuff, right? Because, I think that it's wonderful that our kids want to kind of protect us too, just as much as we want to protect them. But I told him we can't walk around on eggshells here. We've got to expose everything. We need to bring it out so that we can heal it. So that was one of the things that really was very helpful. And the fact that he was upfront with us, and if he didn't want to give specifics, because I don't want to hear all the ins and outs of it all, but I need to have some information so that I can help you. And when I would ask him blunt questions, he would answer to the best of his ability, or even say, if it was too much information, I don't feel comfortable telling you that,
Mhm.
which was perfectly fine also. So just a lot of work. I mean, and that isn't that what relationships take anyway, work.
They do.
So, it's something that you have to put energy into, but a lot of forgiving also. I had to forgive him, I had to forgive myself, and he had to, do some forgiving also and repenting.
Yeah. Um, I'm sure among the questions that you asked was the why question. And you alluded
Mm-hmm.
to your first instinct was to say, I was a bad mom. I failed my son.
Yeah.
Um, and you've kind of hinted that that's not the whole truth. Whether there's any truth in there or not, it's certainly not the whole truth. How has your understanding of the why,
Yeah.
and how has that developed and grown as you move past the initial time and your son is now more grown and now you're
Yeah.
helping others?
Yeah. Well, the why is so important. And I'm glad you asked the question, because I think that is one of the first things as parents we always ask, whatever behavior our children are
Yeah.
doing. Why are you doing this? And there's a lot of it's a complicated answer, but there's a lot of things. One is our children's brains are not developed completely yet, so they have this innate desire to just follow the pleasure wherever their nose leads them. So that's their amygdala leading their prefrontal cortex, which you probably know a lot about, and I teach in the classrooms when I talk to students. But so there's that. But the other is they're just naturally curious. So our
Sure.
kids are naturally curious. So if they choose to act on that curiosity and Google something, breasts or sex or whatever, because
Yeah.
they're just interested,
Yeah.
they open up this Pandora's box, just this wide array of violent, aggressive videos that parents are unaware of are out there, right? Because I, as old as I am now, I didn't realize how easily accessible it was. I didn't realize how violent and aggressive it was. And that if you just Googled something innocently like that, you're going to see all those behaviors. And the other is they aren't just they aren't just looking for it. Their friends are showing them. And the pornography industry actually preys on our children. So the pornography industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And they want our children to start watching videos because they know that if a child starts watching at an earlier age, they have a consumer for life because it's addictive. So the why has morphed. So I no longer see my son as this monster because that's what I assumed about this behavior. Instead, I see him as a victim of the pornography industry. And we can see our children as potential victors also, because I know now my son is a victor because he's overcome this habit and he stands in victory. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
That's really good, Barb. And one of the things that you alluded to, some of our listeners may assume that when we talk about porn, we're talking about what may have in the past just been, a Playboy, someone who's unclothed. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about porn today.
Right.
Kids in elementary and middle school can see videos that you and I would want to throw up to if we haven't been in that world, and the darkness, the violence. And I'm glad you alluded to that. And I just want to pause and let our listeners gently know that this is evil at work.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I was just doing some research for my book earlier this week, and I had to pause because even just reading about it makes me want to throw up. It's objectifying. It's racist. It's aggressive. It's really sad how it changes and warps our children's mind because they don't know it's unrealistic. That's the other thing about it, is they go and they see it accidentally or however, and they don't understand that that's not a loving relationship. That's not how sexual relations are supposed to be. That's not an intimate thing. And because they don't have that frame of reference, because they don't know it already, they assume that that is the way sex is supposed to happen, which is also why child-on-child sexual abuse is on the rise.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some questions or thoughts that people listening or watching may be having if they're a parent. Okay. One might be, what would you say to a parent who feels like, oh, it's not going to be my child? I can just try harder and protect my child. It's not going to happen to them. Sure. What might you say?
Yeah, that's a normal response, I think. And that's absolutely something I would have thought and probably did think before my son was exposed. And we can protect our children, but it's no longer, we can't say our kids are not going to see it anymore. It's no longer if, it's now when, really. Statistics show that almost every child sees pornography before they're 18. And we don't even need to separate boys and girls anymore. This is a boy and a girl issue. And as you alluded to at the beginning, we met at a conference for women who had a pornography problem. So it's not just boys, like I said. So we need to be prepared. And even if they're not looking for it, their friends see it. Even if they don't have a phone, their friends have phones. Yes. Even if they're homeschooled, like my child was, they have friends who know about it. So we need to be prepared and not scared about it anymore, because I think that's the problem, is we think, well, if we protect them and not talk about it, then we don't have to deal with it. And we're afraid as parents to expose them, to bring it up, because we don't want to be the ones that make them look for it, so to speak. So if we see it though as we're protecting our child, and we tell them not to do drugs, don't run in the street, don't touch the hot stove, hey, don't look at pornography. If we just kind of flow, this is a natural thing. We're just going to tell you, just like we tell everything else, what the pros and cons are of things, and the dangers of pornography, then we don't have to be afraid of it.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, not have to be afraid of it, that God has equipped you as a parent. If you're the one listening or watching as a parent, God has given you the job. You may not feel like you know everything or can do everything that you're, quote, supposed to do, but God has called you to this, and has given you the tools, and fear is not one of them. And I like that you said too, Barb, it's not any longer if, it's when. So to equip your children, what do you do when you see something that's like this or makes you feel this way? Or what do you as a parent want to tell your child to do to equip them for that moment that almost certainly will come?
Right. Yeah. And there's lots of ways to equip them. And I mean, depending on their age, of course,
Right.
there's lots of books out there, but in coupling it with, this is how God intended sex to be.
Good.
And this is how the world has distorted it. And when we frame it and make sure that they understand, like, we're not against it. You know, I frequently say when I'm in the classroom talking with students, we're not against sex.
Yeah.
We are for it. We actually want you to enjoy it
God
someday.
is. God wants you to enjoy it. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, you know, that's, I think, the other fear is that we're going to put them like, we're going to make them think that sex isn't a good thing. Well, no, not if we talk about it and we tell them that it can be very enjoyable, and God designed it. So, you know, we're not afraid of it. Yeah.
Um, Something else that a parent may be thinking, something like, well, my kid has been watching porn. What the blank do I do?
Yeah.
You certainly learned some things in your journey, and part of what you do is helping other parents understand what to do, and you have a resource about, what to do when your child sees porn. Unpack that for a minute.
Okay. Yeah, at hopefulmom.net, my biggest desire is to come alongside parents and give them like a virtual hug, because that was one thing that I really struggled with. Like, I could find help for my kids. I did a bunch of research and they told me do this, do this, do this, but I couldn't find help for myself. Like, I needed someone to wrap their arms around me and say, you got this, girl. So that's what I like to do with parents. So come, look around at the website. There's lots of blogs that kind of try and give you that virtual hug.
Yeah.
But the initial, steps, as far as what can I do have a download on there that's free when you subscribe at Hopeful Mom. The first thing to do is just pause
Good.
and pray, because if there's a problem, a real deep ingrained problem, it didn't manifest itself overnight. So we can't fix it overnight. So we don't have to rush into it and think, I got to fix it. We can pause, we can pray, and we can process, because when we take that time, then we don't look like that crazy mom, we don't freak out. Now, I did freak out a little bit when my son came to me, because I didn't have that time to process. And I just was blindsided. And that's what we're trying to prevent here is our parents from being blindsided. So pray, process, pause. Add filters. Every household needs filters on their Wi-Fi, on their devices. Use the parental controls. We are not being distrusting. We're not being nosy. We're being parents. We're protecting our children by putting healthy boundaries in place. And I believe that every household needs them, whether you have children or not, because these boundaries are important. When they're not there, then this stuff just pops up willy-nilly, and we don't need that in our lives, do we? We got enough problems. Open a line of communication. So yes, we need the filters, but they're not foolproof. I think our best line of offense and defense is communicating with our children and opening up that communication, going to our children and saying, I know that children your age might see pornography. Just ask a question. What do you know about it? see what they tell you. And then revisit it on a regular basis. If there's actually an issue, then we had regular check-ins with our son for quite some time. Every single night there was a check-in, and his dad did like most of the like pointed questions, like how specifically is it going. But then throughout the day, I would say something, how you doing? I can typically tell if there was a struggle going on. And I was so grateful that he was willing to tell us that. But opening up that line of communication, not every child is going to respond well to that. But if we continue to try and we continue to keep a calm demeanor and just remind our children on a regular basis, I love you. I'll always love you. It's my job to protect you. It's my job to take care of you. Then hopefully they begin to trust us. And at some point they will open up and be real with us. Evaluate all the boundaries. So when our son first told us, and then again, the second time told us, he actually, of course, he was 16 and he was ready to, put this behind him. He actually told us what boundaries were important for him. He asked us to remove social media from his phone. He asked us to put his phone in our bathroom every night. And I highly recommend, as far as boundaries, no devices in bathrooms, no devices in bedrooms, especially, at a younger age. It's not necessary to be in there. So evaluate the boundaries and what needs to be assessed. And almost everything we assessed on a regular basis. That doesn't mean they can't ever see friends for the rest of their life, or they can't ever have a device in their hand again. But, tighten those reins a little bit and then let them out a little by little as they're ready for it. I recommend self-care, because what I desperately needed to make sure that I was taking care of myself, that oxygen mask thing where we put on our oxygen mask first and then we help our child. It's so important for us to be taking care of ourselves, going to bed and getting sleep when you can. I know I could barely sleep the first month after hearing of all this, eating properly, exercising, taking breaks. I regularly walk just throughout the day, just to give myself that mental break. And find a friend, find one person.
Thank you, Barb, for going through that. Such helpful material. And we will definitely make links available under this video if you're watching, or in the show notes if you're listening. Couple things you referenced that I wanted to just comment on too. Your son was 14. But you've alluded to it may be much younger. I hear from people who are struggling with porn addiction, who first were exposed 7, 8, 10. I know that as well. And it just reminds us all that no child or teen or anybody, wakes up one day and says, today I'm going to get addicted to porn. This is something that first happens to them. And then they're, at whatever stage of development their brain is, it goes in that direction. You also mentioned your husband, and I thought that was so important. How did the two of you work through this together? Did this impact the relationship between the two of you? What was that like?
I am so grateful for my husband. He is my best friend. So we leaned on each other. I think it strengthened our relationship. Of course, no parent wants to go through this, but thankfully we actually had each other. We could go back and forth. So when I was having a bad day, he would kind of lift me up, give me some hope, encourage me. When he was feeling a little disheartened or distraught, I would come alongside him and say, you've got this. It's okay. We can do this together. So, I did say find a friend, and I do mean it, because when you're that close to the situation, we couldn't always both see the outside perspective. So you do need that. But it was so fantastic for me to have such a great husband. And we prayed together, we looked at scripture, we went together to try and figure out what are we going to do, what steps are we going to take. So we came up with a program together, and we just really were a great support system for each other.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, Barb, this has been so good, and I believe that some parents watching or listening to this will come to hopefulmom.net, and you will be one of their friends and take access of those resources in your writing, and you've got a book coming out, and just you're really giving virtual hugs that are so needed. Maybe just as we close, just an invitation to those listening and watching to come join you and be part of your network and get some of those virtual hugs.
Absolutely. They're always welcome. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, LinkedIn, and of course, hopefulmom.net. I love to hear from people. I love to hear their stories. So if you haven't been able to tell your story to anyone yet, shoot me an email through my website. Tell me your story, and we'll see if I can help you in any way. Yeah. And I do have a book coming out in August of 2023. So I'm excited about that too.
Awesome. Congratulations from one writer to another. I know that's a big accomplishment, a big step. Happy for you there. Barb, thank you. Bless you, your family, your son, and the many people you help. Thank you for sharing your heart, your story with us today, and God richly bless you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Carol, for having me on here today.
Having this information can keep you from freaking out, as Barb did, if your child is wrestling with some of these things. And my plea to you, if you are a parent, is don't wait until your child is 14 or 16. Start having these conversations early. That's part of what Barb's material can help you understand how to do. We also have some material at drcarolministries.com that I'll share with the links underneath this video. One is a link to Covenant Eyes, one of the premier Christian faith-based internet controls to put on all your devices. We will link to that. Also, the Sex Talk, a comprehensive video course for parents. This isn't something you watch with your kids. This is for you as a parent. We have a link under this video to where you can find out more on our website, drcarolministries.com/thesextalk. And get equipped to start the conversation long before your child is 14 and hooked on porn. I also do encourage you to check out Barb's material at The Hopeful Mom, and we'll have all that under this video. You as a parent need to be equipped. God has gifted you with what you need, but take advantage of these resources so that you can lead your child, your children, to become all that God needs them to be, and that you can have your heart whole in the process. Remember, God hasn't promised that even if you parent perfectly, your child will be perfect. They have free choices, and God as a parent didn't have all perfect children. We're examples of that. But do what you can. Connect with others. I love how Barb finished, find a friend. You need that. I also love to hear from you. Leave a comment or a question in the comments under this video. You can reach out to me confidentially through our website, the contact page there. And until next time, may God bless you.